I love documentaries. I love watching them and rewatching them and watching the special features. And if there's a disc 2, I'll watch disc 2. I'm going to share my favorites. This video is especially relevant if you're a writer, if you are a novelist or a poet or a stand-up comedian, or if you use Twitter.
What was your reaction to the success of To Kill a Mockingbird? I often wondered how an author who wrote what became an immediate smash would react.
Well, my reaction to it was not one of surprise, it was one of sheer numbness. It was one of being hit over the head and knocked cold.
Today we're going to talk about 3 documentaries. One is about Harper Lee, the woman who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. The second documentary is about Allen Ginsberg, the man who wrote the poem Howl. And the third documentary is about screenwriters, the people who write the scripts to Hollywood movies like Jaws, Shawshank Redemption, and Bruce Almighty.
I never expected that the book would sell in the first place. I was hoping for a quick and merciful death at the hands of the reviewers, but I was hoping that maybe somebody might like it well enough to give me some encouragement about it.
This documentary is called Hey Boo. Harper Lee is a writer from the southern states, and she wrote Mockingbird before the civil rights movement. The story is about a young girl named Scout, her father, Atticus, who is a lawyer, and Tom, a man accused of rape whom Atticus is defending. Mockingbird is commonly assigned as required reading in schools.
Which particular scene that resonates with you, that you remember and will probably remember forever? Nick?
When Atticus is questioning Mayella Ewell, and it's so obvious to everyone in that courtroom that she just made the whole thing up, that Tom Robinson was innocent, and yet the racism in that time was so great, they couldn't let a black man who was obviously innocent go free.
Tom was broken by the court case, and he really didn't want to live or didn't want to be in prison like in a world like that anymore, where he could be prosecuted for no just reason. And the pain that Mrs. Robinson felt when Atticus told her that Tom had been shot 17 times, that really will stick with me for a while, and I think about it a lot.
It really teaches about judgment. I mean, in the book, how do you judge Bob Ewell? Do you judge him as some maniac, or you feel bad for him? You can't. It's all about judgment, and that's in life too. You have to make decisions.
I didn't read this book in school. It was assigned to me, but I ignored the assignment. Now, as an adult looking back, I can see that this is one of the greatest books ever written. And it was written by a writer who had a wonderful environment in which to write it. Harper's father was a lawyer.
I grew up in a courtroom, and mostly I watched my father from the balcony. He is one of the few men I've ever known who had genuine humility. He had absolutely no ego drive, and so he was one of the most beloved men in this part of the state.
The Lee household was a household that espoused values that were ahead of the times in which they lived.
A.C. Lee was a state legislator, the editor of the local paper, and a respected lawyer who worked in this courtroom while his daughter looked on.
And Harper grew up in a southern town where storytelling was something everybody did.
We did not have the pleasures of the theater, of the dance, of motion pictures when they came along. We simply entertain each other by talking. It's quite a thing if you've never gone or if you've never known a southern small town. We had to use our own devices for our entertainment. We didn't have much money. Nobody had any money. We didn't have many toys to play with. Nothing was done for us. So the result was that we lived in our imaginations most of the time.
The story is narrated by Scout, the daughter. Through her eyes, you can watch someone learn the difference between right and wrong.
It was a time in which black people were treated terribly, and people took in racism with their mother's milk.
You know, I grew up when the Klan was still active, and we would drive along 31 Highway, and you'd see all the signs, white supremacy. You know, black people stayed in their neighborhoods.
I remember watching it, first assuming that Atticus was going to get Tom Robinson off, because Tom Robinson was innocent, and Atticus was played by Gregory Peck, and of course he's going to win. And then, as it dawned on me that it wasn't going to happen, you know, I started getting upset about that, and then I started getting really upset about being upset, because by, you know, rooting for a black man, you were kind of betraying every principle that you had been raised to believe. And I remember thinking that, what would my father think if he saw me fighting back these tears when Tom Robinson gets shot? It was a really disturbing experience. To be crying for a black man was so taboo that, you know, it made me confront the difficulty that Southerners have in going against people that they love.
That is a hell of a testimony. Documentaries can bring the truth out of people. They'll share the origins of their philosophy with you. Now, speaking of philosophy, this book can teach you how to be yourself loudly. Scout can teach you.
When I was a kid, I collected insurrectionary, outspoken, not girly girls in books. There was Anne of Green Gables, and there's Jo March in Little Women, and there's Scout in To Kill a Mockingbird.
But Scout is irresistible. She's just irresistible.
She's a scamp, and hysterically funny, and no less funny as an adult looking back, although in a slightly more fermented and seasoned way. And she's just great company.
I felt so attached to her. I just wish I could have been as smart as Scout and always been there with the comeback, but oh well.
What do you think you're doing?
I love the fact that she's a little smart ass. She speaks first with her fists and then has to sort of back up 3 or 4 steps. She's sort of an extension of like a Huck Finn character.
Many writers have tried it. Many writers, they do it all the time, you know, the innocent child business. But this child sees the world as an adult. She sees the world through child's eyes, but with an adult's understanding. And that's part of why this is a great book, and that's part of why Harper Lee is a great American writer.
Legendary book, legendary moment in history, legendary movie to come out of the book. The American Bar Association released a list of their favorite legal movies. Number 3 was My Cousin Vinny. Number 2 was 12 Angry Men. And number 1 was To Kill a Mockingbird.
When I was young, I thought it was pretty dumb. So I decided I better be smart and shut up and listen and be sensitive and innocent and shy and goofy, but really pay attention to what other people said. So I listened very carefully, always worried and anxious that maybe I was getting it all wrong or that I was too stupid to understand. And I found that actually the people that were smarter than me were smarter than me, and they had something to tell me, so I heard it.
This documentary is about Allen Ginsberg. Allen is a poet from the 1950s. With Jack Kerouac and William S. Burroughs, they make up the 3 most famous writers from the Beat generation. The Beat generation was the generation of artists that came before the hippies and the flower children.
You couldn't have had the 60s without the 50s, to make sort of a stupid, redundant point, but it is true. And I mean the 50s are the Beats.
when I was putting the manuscript together. Kerouac was visiting, and they all took psilocybin. I was sort of like the guide. And Jack got very high and very funny. And then Leary asked him what he thought about, I don't know, the vision of the cosmos or something on psychedelics. And Kerouac, the old Catholic, turned and said, walking on water wasn't built in a day, meaning the attainment of supreme reality, new vision, new illumination, new consciousness, the evolution of human consciousness, walking on water wasn't built in a day.
During the session, we sat down around the table, and Allen started spinning out his concern about the misuse of drugs in America and the need to have a positive approach, a spiritual approach to psychedelic drugs, and instigated in my mind basically the politics of ecstasy, the notion that we would have to go around the country turning on influential artists, writers, poets, philosophers, so that they could report back to us what they were getting from their brain-activated experiences, and then could pass on to the world the benefit of their trips.
We all had a party at the Hells Angels house. Most everybody there took LSD. We settled down to discussing the situation, discussing the images being set up against everybody and reinforced, and listening to Joan Baez records on the phonograph, and chanting Buddhist prayers. We were all awed by the communication between us that was possible, everybody able to drop their habitual image for the night and feel more common unity than conflict. The LSD was not the whole story. Our own efforts were part of the story. The goodwill of everybody was part of the story. And there was a desire for communion, and there was a fear of the endless isolation that all of us might have encountered. But LSD helped break down that fear barrier.
I love the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. That's when kids realized they could change the world. The timeline goes, mid-1950s, Allen Ginsberg and the Beats take LSD, become artists, and try to convince other people to do the same. In 1960, Harper Lee drops Mockingbird. In 1961 are the Freedom Riders. 1964 is the Berkeley College free speech movement. From this comes women's rights, gay rights, make love not war, freedom of speech, moon landings, birth control pill, Watergate. So much comes out of this period of time.
I loved what Allen did. I couldn't ohm and get naked on somebody's front lawn and get myself arrested. It wasn't my style, but I really admired that. It turned some people off naturally, but there was something sort of wonderfully liberating about it, and wonderfully liberating about him and his. You know what it was? I think it's because Allen could behave like a nut, but he was serious about something. He was serious about other people's lives. He was serious about ending the war in Vietnam. And Allen took risks and was serious, and at the same time was very colorful and very crazy, and we need that.
Funny story about Allen. My mother knew his niece. One day his niece said, "Hey, come visit my uncle. He's a poet. He just moved to Newark." My mom visits, meets Allen, hangs out for a little bit. Allen gives her a book of his collected poems, and this is that book. This is from Allen Ginsberg.
The left was not able to lead the middle class out of the war because the left was too busy insulting Humphrey and insulting the middle class. So it was the fault of the left that Nixon got in because they didn't vote in 1968, because they were pissed off about their father figure, liberal Humphrey, not doing it the way they wanted to do it in their style. And Nixon squeaked in by 500,000 votes, and the war went on for another 6 years with more murder and devastation than ever before. Kerouac's comment on our behavior at Chicago was that, all they're doing is inventing new reasons for spitefulness. And the blood of the Vietnam War from Nixon years on, it rests equally on the hands of the left and the right. And Kerouac zeroed right in on it. Said new reasons for spitefulness.
Another fun fact, Allen wrote Howl, which is his most famous poem.
I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night, who poverty and tatters and hollow-eyed and high set up smoking in the supernatural darkness of cold water flats floating across the tops of cities, contemplating jazz, who bared their brains to heaven under the L and saw Mohammedan angels staggering on tenement roofs illuminated, who passed through universities with radiant, cool eyes hallucinating Arkansas and Blake Light tragedy among the scholars of war, who were expelled from the academies for crazy and publishing obscene odes on the windows of the skull, who cowered in unshaven rooms in underwear, burning their money in wastebaskets and listening to the terror through the wall.
This is referenced in an episode of The Simpsons, Bart vs. Thanksgiving, Season 2, Episode 7.
I saw the best meals of my generation destroyed by the madness of my brother. My soul carved in slices by spiky-haired demons.
Did you notice the book on Lisa's shelf, On the Road by Jack Kerouac?
Saw the best meals of my generation destroyed by the madness of my brother. My soul carved in slices by spiky-haired demons.
Ginsberg is one of the original hippies. He knew how to put a sentence together.
It's 2 a.m. and I got to get up early and taxi 20 miles to satisfy my ambition. How'd I get into this fix, this workaholic showbiz meditation market? If I had a soul, I sold it for pretty words. If I had a body, I used it up, spurting my essence. If I had a mind, it got covered with love. If I had a spirit, I forgot when I was breathing. If I had speech, it was all a boast. If I had desire, it went out my anus. If I had ambitions to be liberated, how'd I get into this wrinkled person? With pretty words, love essences, breathing boasts, anal longings, famous crimes? What a mess I am, Allen Ginsberg.
Our third documentary is called Tales from the Script.
A brief story, just so you understand how Hollywood works. When I had written Ghost, I walked out of the commissary with a number of executives, and they turned to me as we were walking, and they said, "Bruce, we just want you to know that Ghost is the best script we have ever read." And I couldn't quite believe it, but I just felt, oh my God, this is extraordinary. I felt so wonderful, and I sort of floated away. About a week later, I was walking out of the commissary behind those same executives who were walking with another writer, and I was listening to them, and they said to the writer, "We just want you to know that your script is the best script we have ever read."
This documentary is about Hollywood. It's about being a writer and dealing with budgets, executives, and deadlines.
There's things, dynamics you don't know about, okay? There's this executive that's in your meeting, and she's been frustrated that every movie that comes out of this process turns into some kind of movie aimed at teenage boys with, fart jokes, and she's trying to elevate the material. And then you have her arch enemy who's not going to make any wussy movies. Then you have the person who's like, job is shaky, who wants to show off in the meeting, right? So all this stuff is going on. So you want them to have a good meeting, right? That's the whole thing there. So one of the things you could do is you could go in there and leave opportunities for plug and play. See, if they can say anything in the meeting that they can think is their idea, then they're invested. So for example, you might say, And I think these villains are doing something. They're doing something to like screw with our economy. They want to mess with our money. They're trying to fool people. They're trying to pick people. They got a big suitcase full of counterfeit money. Yes, that's right. It could be counterfeit money. Yes, let me look. Can I write that down?
I did a film for Disney, and it was an idea they had, and there was a one-word idea, and they said shadows. And I said, shadows, okay, what about shadows? They said, that's it, that's the idea, shadows, do something with it. So I came up with this idea about a guy whose shadow is alive. The guy is really awkward with women, and he likes this girl that he works with. His shadow and her shadow fall in love, and they contrive to get the human beings together. You know, I was happy with it, and I wrote the script. And Disney said, wow, it's really good, but, you know, it's a love story, and what we really want is a buddy film. Like, imagine your shadow is Eddie Murphy. And I said, well, that's interesting. It's completely not what I wrote. And it's like, you know, I'm used to getting notes where someone says, you know, okay, Act 2 needs some work, but I'm not used to getting notes where they say, okay, let's change the genre.
This documentary shows you how many movies you have to write to get one made.
I wrote 14 drafts of Akeelah and the Bee before we shot it. The third draft won the Nickel Fellowship. I'm glad I didn't shoot that draft, because that draft was not ready.
Chinatown took 17 drafts, and none of us are as good as Robert Towne. Amadeus, I think, took 46, and none of us are as good as Peter Shaffer. So all that means is that the previous 45 of Amadeus, someone said, Peter, you can do better. And I'm sure it pissed him off and hurt his feelings, but he kept writing, and he wound up with one of the best movies ever.
I wrote 41 drafts of my story before Todd Black felt like he could give it to Fox. And then after that, you know, the executives gave me a lot of notes, and then I went on writing more. Me and Denzel and Todd worked on it for 9 years, almost, 6 years. And so I must have written over 100 drafts of that story.
That's a lot of drafts. That's also the usual pattern. In all arts, you have to cast 1,000 lines before you catch one fish. Shuffle 1,000 decks before you draw one royal flush. Luckily for writers, we can always write another draft.
Sometimes it's just like, you wrote one really good sentence, and you may never get sort of called out for it. You may never sort of get the props for it that you deserve, but you know that you wrote a really good sentence. And unlike a lot of the jobs in this business, at least you have the pages you wrote. And a director doesn't have anything unless somebody gives them permission to make a movie. A writer can at least always write a script, and that's sort of the one great luxury we have is, you know, words are cheap.
Let me read Dalton Trumbo. He's a screenwriter from the 1950s, and he was banned from Hollywood. When he was banned, he wrote this. It is not alone the loss of income or of property that hurts. The more terrible wound is the loss of a profession to which one's entire life has been dedicated. A director must have the facilities of a studio. Denied them, he sells real estate. A violinist must appear in person for the concert. Barred from admittance, he becomes a milkman and practices 6 hours a day against the unrevealed time when his music once more may be heard. The actor's physical personality, which is his greatest asset, becomes his supreme curse under the blacklist. He must be seen, and when the sight of him is prohibited, he becomes a carpenter, an insurance salesman, a barber. A writer is more fortunate. Give him nothing more than paper and a pencil and a nice clean cell, and he's in business. Dante, Cervantes, Rousseau, Voltaire, Ben Jonson, Milton, Defoe, Bunyan, Hugo, Zola, and a score of others have long since proved that in jail or out, writing under their own names or someone else's, or a pseudonym or anonymously, writers will write. And that having written they will find an audience. Only fools with no knowledge of history and bureaucrats with no knowledge of literature are stupid enough to think otherwise. And so it chanced in Hollywood that each blacklisted writer, after swiftly describing that long parabola from the heart of the motion picture industry to a small house in a low-rent district, picked himself up. dusted his trousers, anointed his abrasions, looked around for a ream of clean white paper and something to deface it with, and began to write. Through secret channels, and by means so cunning they may never be revealed, what he wrote was passed along until finally it appeared on a producer's desk, and the producer looked upon it, found it good, and monies were paid, and the writer's children began contentedly to eat. Thus the black market. It was Dalton Trumbo being banned, along with many other screenwriters and Hollywood professionals, that began the Berkeley riots, the Berkeley free speech movement, the student protests, in the first place. The point is, writers can always write. Stranded on a desert island, we have sticks and sand. Locked in a padded cell, we have hangnails and skin. Our form of expression can always exist. I'm using my writing talents now as I speak with you. This is a blessing we ought to count.
I love the experience of writing. I love the way it takes off, and sometimes the characters start talking for themselves and the situations start changing, and suddenly you're just kind of like the court stenographer writing down what these people are saying, and the movie turns out entirely differently than you expected it to. I often say, you know, after I write the script, you can come in the room and search the room, and you won't find anybody else in there. I did it all by myself.
I think back on some images that were really just crazy crap in my own head that's now up there in some films that I've written. That's pretty amazing. I mean, it really is like having some projector from your brain.
I get to actually live out my dream that I had ever since I was a kid, to be a part of Hollywood and to actually see movies get made and to actually see an audience react to an idea that I had once. And I sat down and I wrote it, and remember when we were up at 3:30 in the morning trying to get that shot, and now here we are eating cheese and crackers at the screening, and they're laughing at the jokes. There's no better feeling.
In screenwriting, you will be writing with others. You will do rewrites as the director needs them.
Steven's like your kindly, funny Jewish uncle who you're happy to have lunch with, and then he gives you kind of a couple little suggestions for your script, and you're thinking, oh, silly Jewish uncle, that can't work. And then you go home and you start working on the screenplay, and you're like, oh, that's kind of genius, isn't it? And I had that happen a number of times where, he would say, well, why don't you try this or do this? And I'd think, I wouldn't think, oh, that was the most revelatory, genius, kind of Zen koan screenwriter moment I've had. And then you go and you kind of start implementing it, and it's in it, and all of a sudden a scene or a sequence or something just opens up in a way that you're like, wow, I guess he does know what he's doing. I guess he really is Steven Spielberg. He's not just my Uncle Steve.
When I was a young man out of the business and a young man in the business, I believed that my opinion was absolutely right and that I had the right answer to all questions. With age and experience, I learned that I was right on all of those occasions, but that there are several right answers to all occasions.
And those are 3 documentaries every writer should watch. In 90 minutes, you can be brought into a world that you knew little about, and you can walk away with a new idol, a new ambition. You can learn how to be brave by watching someone else be brave. You can learn how to be persistent by watching someone else be persistent. Watch documentaries. Borrow the best qualities from the people who came before you.